Okay, today I'm going to talk about one of my very favorite essays that has ever been written. I can't even tell you how many times I've probably read it. It's from a book called Reforming Education by Mortimer Adler. He was involved with Hutchins, watched the author bio on them to understand the history of American education and the role that he played, and some really fascinating facts about him. This essay I have found in the public domain on a list of essays that were, I think it seems like they were published in periodicals or something during his lifetime or something. I don't know if there's still copyright laws on it, so I'm hesitant to post it. I'll do some more research and see if I can find a link that I feel like it's legal for me to give it to you. Otherwise, you're going to have to buy the book. And you're going to have to buy the book and read Reforming Education, from Reforming Education. The essay is called Education and the Pursuit of Happiness. It was actually first given as a speech and then tweaked a little bit to be put into essay form. It was given in 1976, which is one of the reasons why I'm a little unsure about the copyright issues. It was the Commencement Address at the University of Denver. 29th of May, 1776. And he says, the fact that your graduation from the University of Denver coincides with the bicentennial anniversary of the Declaration of Independence dictates the theme of this commencement address. So this is kind of when it was being written. And it was something that he wanted to say, and he used the event and the time frame of it to give this information. Now, this whole book is wonderful. And I'll talk about other essays from this book, so I just think you should buy the book Reforming Education, and I'll tell you some of my favorite essays from it. But this one in particular is my very, very favorite essay, not just from him, but from almost anybody, because it taught me two important concepts that I had never thought about in the way that he presents them. It's interesting because he's trying to tie education to the Declaration of Independence and help Americans see that forced education and required education isn't necessarily the sense in which the founders meant pursuit of happiness, and he's trying to tie education to pursuit of happiness. So he talks about these other two concepts to build his argument about what education should do for you to help you become a lifelong learner. But the irony of that is that it's the two concepts that he teaches leading up to his principal argument that have made the difference in the way I think about myself in the world. I always use it when I teach, especially used it in my lifelong learning classes that we did. I've used it in these concepts in many lectures, and I've also gone back to the great books to verify this first concept or principle that he teaches, and it's right there. I've found it in many of the original writings of the Western world, the great book set. Plato talks about it, Adler talks about it, Aristotle talks about it, what's his bucket? Herodotus found it there, Solon's talking about it, really super awesome. And then you get into like Scottish Enlightenment thinkers and founding generation. It's just a big, big theme for me. It's something that we go over with people and use in mentoring programs, etc., because it is so critical to understand. He introduces the idea and then he moves on. It's worth pondering, it's worth connecting. I'll do some linking of other sources that teach the same concept so that you could kind of read it together if you wanted to and really come to understand this principle. The principle is the conception or definition of happiness. Now, everybody talks about happiness. And it is probably one of the few things that there are some philosophers that wouldn't entirely agree. But most important thinkers in history, even Thoughts on Government by John Adams, one of the first things he says is, so we all agree that the purpose of life is to be happy, and all philosophers agree that the best government is the one that will make us happy, and they all agree on this concept of being virtuous connected with happiness, okay? So what he's saying here, this is so, I can't even tell you how on fire I am about this still today, how often I teach it and talk about it, because I feel it's so critical. It's this idea that there are actually two definitions of happiness. That there's an ancient definition that actually runs all the way through America's founding and into the 19th century and died off and was replaced with a modern definition of happiness, and we think our modern definition of happiness is the only definition. Okay, it's super awesome, because what you think happiness is makes all the difference as to whether or not you think you're happy. And if you think that happiness means something and you're not happy, then what you do is you begin to analyze yourself in your life and think that there's something wrong with you. I can't tell you how many people are on antidepressants because they think something is wrong with them in their life because they aren't happy. Okay, so how can that be? How are there two definitions of happiness? Well, very succinctly put, the modern definition is an emotional definition. We feel happy, he says. The individual is deemed happy whenever at a given time he has satisfied all the desires that he happens to have at that time. Okay. I feel happy right now. It's all about how you feel. It's an emotional definition. If you're not feeling elated and on top of the world and excited all the time, you're not happy, which means there's something wrong, which means you need therapy or antidepressants or a doctor, or you need to have more fun or experience more pleasure because you're not feeling it, right? People get divorced, people change career, they go back to school, they do all kinds of things to try to be happy because, you know, you're normal, average, everyday person. So that's the modern definition or conception of happiness. But the older definition, he defines it this way. Happiness as an ultimate objective is not a terminal goal, but only a normative end. Okay, that sounds really difficult to understand. And it's taken me a long time reading other writings on this older definition of happiness, analyzing them, comparing them to understand what this means, which is why we teach it in the mentoring program so that people have a gauge and an understanding of a very important concept that's linked with morality, principles, and, as we'll find out in a minute, needs. This means that happiness is conceived as the goodness of a whole human life and therefore as something which cannot be experienced or enjoyed at any moment during the course of a lifetime. So he's trying to help us understand that we're not entitled, that getting your driveway cleaned off or getting a million, having everything being completely taken care of by your government, whatever it is, those aren't rights that create happiness. What it is that when we understand what the founders meant by happiness, then we know how to interpret everything that they said. Okay? And I'll bring this up with Declaration of Independence and other readings that I'll put up, but basically it's this. I can't get into the whole thing right now because it has to be connected with other readings. You just have to do mentoring, watch lecture, I don't know, something to completely understand this. But basically, the ancient definition was happiness as tied to behavior. It would bring you inner peace because you were true to your conscience, because you lived by natural laws. You were obedient to whatever you deemed as natural laws or God laws or principles or conscience, and because of that, you didn't feel elated and excited all the time. Sometimes you were struggling, suffering, having a hard time, but your life had been a happy one because it had enriched others. You had left the world a better place than you found it. You had made the lives of those around you better. You had been true to your conscience. You felt at peace with yourself. We have all kinds of, in my opinion, very unhealthy and funky ways of going about trying to help people be happy today, most of which have been totally wrenched away from the idea of any kind of truth or absolute or principle on any level. And I know this not just from media and personal experience, but also from study and reading. The American Psychological Association totally has thrown out the idea of any absolutes. Anyway, go on forever. He's saying there's a different definition of happiness that's tied to absolutes. And he says what those absolutes are needs. So he says, and it would be really fun to read this in conjunction with the Maslow chapters. And anyway, with Blackstone, others, just it's a whole big picture that's really fascinating. So the second concept that I came to understand that this article introduced me to, that sent me off on a path of years of study of these ideas, that is the idea of needs. He says needs are absolute and wants are relative. He says this: almost all of us want things we do not need and fail to want things that we do need. Needs are always right desires. There can be no wrong or misguided needs. So that means that happiness consists in having all the real goods that are rightly desired because they are things that every human being needs to lead a good life. So, the founding generation, the ancient definition, the concept is this. It ties into so many other readings. I just don't, anyway, I'm just so passionate about it, it's hard for me to be clear. In order to be happy, our needs must be met, but they have to be real and legitimate absolute needs that every human being always has, no matter whether or not they want it. That produces a happy life that at the end of your life you can say, yes, I made a massive contribution to the world, I am at peace with myself, and not in a subjective way, but in a real way because you've worked hard and done your part, and you've lived according to your duty and your conscience, and you have met your own needs and sought to meet the needs of others. Okay? It's a profound idea that he introduces here that I would highly suggest that you go on to read and try to understand. Simple example, thirst. Everybody has a need for water, but many people say that they hate water. Problem is, they drink soda all the time and they constantly dehydrate themselves. And then they have the consequence of that in all kinds of physical difficulties, diseases and ailments that plague them because they didn't meet their need for water. Now that's biological. We also have a need, as Maslow says in his hierarchy of needs, we have a need for safety, acceptance, belonging, love. We have a need for freedoms. And one of the great things about this article is that Adler goes on to list what he believes are the basic needs of every human being in order to lead a constructive and good life. I have a couple that I add to that list that I feel like he's missing. But overall, brilliantly done, masterful essay, absolutely love it. One of my favorite educational reads and also one of my favorite essays. Those two concepts of happiness and needs have changed my whole outlook in life. I hope you'll read it. Education in the Pursuit of Happiness by Mortimer Adler.